Nelson Piquet, the comment that banned a champion. Piquet was once celebrated as a three-time Formula One world champion, but in 2022, one old interview surfaced and turned his legacy into a scandal. During a conversation recorded months earlier, he referred to Lewis Hamilton using a racial slur in Portuguese. The clip exploded across global media. Sponsors condemned him, teams distanced themselves, and F1 released a statement saying there was no place for discriminatory language of any kind in the sport. It didn't stop there. Investigations uncovered other remarks where Piquet used homophobic language and doubled down on Hamilton. The backlash was immediate. The Brazilian Motorsport Authority suspended his racing licence and Formula One banned him from the paddock. By the time the dust settled, Piquet was in court. A Brazilian judge ordered him to pay nearly $1 million in moral damages, ruling that his words carried real harm to both Hamilton and society. The irony was sharp. A driver once respected for his racing intelligence was now remembered for a single comment that erased years of glory. Piquet tried to clarify, claiming the word was mistranslated or taken out of cultural context, but the damage was done. Hamilton himself didn't mince words, calling on F1 to change mindsets and make the sport more inclusive. Kevin Magnussen, crazy and disrespectful. He burst into Formula One with McLaren in 2014, grabbing a podium on debut and looking like the next big star. But behind the scenes, the team's expectations weighed heavy. Magnussen later revealed that the constant comparisons to Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button pushed him into what he called crazy and disrespectful territory. McLaren, he said, judged him against world champions without giving him the time or support to develop. That one comment stuck. It wasn't framed as bitterness. It was raw honesty about how impossible it felt to meet standards set by legends. And it opened up a debate in the paddock. Was Magnussen mishandled, or was he simply not good enough to survive the McLaren machine? The timing made it worse. He was dropped after just one full season, replaced by Fernando Alonso. For a young driver, being labelled as someone who couldn't meet expectations was poison. It shadowed him through later stints at Renault and Haas, where his aggressive style earned fans but never shook the image of a career that had stumbled early. Years later, Magnussen admitted that the pressure at McLaren shaped how he approached racing, but the damage was lasting. Daniel Ricciardo, the Villeneuve clapback. By 2023, Ricciardo's reputation was already fragile. His difficult years at McLaren had people questioning whether he still belonged in Formula One. Then came Jacques Villeneuve. The 1997 world champion, never shy with a microphone, said Ricciardo's career was propped up by personality more than performance. He called him overrated and implied that his return to the grid with AlphaTauri was more marketing stunt than merit. Ricciardo didn't let it slide. At the Canadian Grand Prix, he fired back with a profanity-laced line in the press pen, basically telling Villeneuve to keep quiet. Cameras caught it, headlines splashed it, and suddenly the story wasn't about his lap times, but about the feud. That exchange snowballed. Fans debated whether Ricciardo had lost the easygoing charm that once made him the most popular driver in the paddock. Commentators dissected every word, asking if he was too thin-skinned or if Villeneuve had gone too far. Either way, the focus on Ricciardo's comeback was hijacked by one sharp comment. Performance pressure didn't help. Ricciardo was fighting to prove he still had the pace to earn a long-term seat, and the Villeneuve episode became another layer of distraction. For a driver trying to rebuild credibility, the headline wasn't "Ricciardo returns strong." It was "Ricciardo snaps back." Arturo Merzario, the Ferrari bombshell. When rumours swirled that Lewis Hamilton might one day join Ferrari, most fans treated it like a dream scenario. But in 2017, former Ferrari driver Arturo Merzario dropped a comment that sparked chaos. He claimed that Ferrari staff didn't want Hamilton, suggesting the team's own people would resist the idea of him wearing red. The line hit like fuel on an open flame. Ferrari was already under pressure, chasing Mercedes' dominance, and suddenly a respected ex-driver was saying their culture itself was part of the problem. Headlines painted it as proof of tension inside Maranello. Supporters of Hamilton accused Ferrari of being closed-minded, while Ferrari loyalists rushed to defend the team's honour. Merzario's words carried weight because they came from an insider. He'd raced for Ferrari in the 1970s, knew the politics, and wasn't afraid of controversy. Even years later, when Hamilton was again linked to Ferrari, journalists dragged Merzario's comment back into the spotlight as evidence of why the move was complicated. The timing stung too. Hamilton was at the peak of his powers, and Ferrari fans were desperate for a driver who could bring them back to championship glory. Instead of excitement, the conversation turned to whether Ferrari's own identity was blocking progress. In the end, Merzario's remark added a layer of suspicion around Ferrari's driver strategy and fueled the idea that some doors in F1 remain closed, no matter how many titles you've won. Fernando Alonso, McLaren's breaking point. When Alonso signed with McLaren in 2007, the partnership was supposed to rewrite history. Instead, it unravelled in less than a year, and a few sharp comments turned a rivalry into a divorce. The trouble started when McLaren's rookie, Lewis Hamilton, refused to play the number 2 role. As tensions rose inside the garage, Alonso openly voiced his frustration, saying he wasn't being treated fairly and hinting that the team favoured Hamilton. Those remarks cut deep. McLaren prided itself on projecting unity, and suddenly their double world champion was publicly accusing them of bias. The final straw came after the infamous Hungarian Grand Prix qualifying standoff, when Alonso delayed Hamilton in the pit lane. FIA penalties followed, but Alonso's press conferences after that race painted a picture of a driver and a team tearing each other apart. The fallout spiralled quickly. McLaren's Spygate scandal erupted that same year, and Alonso's strained relationship with management made reconciliation impossible. By season's end, McLaren announced his exit. 1 season, contract ripped apart, reputation shaken. Alonso later admitted he was emotional and outspoken during that period, acknowledging that the pressure of fighting Hamilton head-to-head clouded his decisions. But the damage was locked in. A career that could have yielded titles with McLaren ended in headlines about betrayal, favouritism, and broken trust. Valtteri Bottas, reputation in neutral. He spent years at Mercedes living in Lewis Hamilton's shadow, but when he moved to Sauber in 2022, the idea was to rebuild his career as a leader. Instead, his own words later revealed just how costly that move was. In an interview, Bottas admitted his time at Sauber damaged his reputation. It was blunt, and it caught attention across the paddock. The comment reflected a harsh reality. Sauber was struggling at the back of the grid, rarely fighting for points, and Bottas found himself out of the spotlight. While Hamilton and Verstappen were fighting for titles, Bottas was running in 14th, trying to drag an underdeveloped car into the midfield. For a driver once winning Grand Prix, those optics hit hard. The moment Bottas said his reputation had been damaged, the narrative shifted. Instead of being seen as a veteran stabilising a small team, he was painted as a former frontrunner who had fallen too far. Media outlets picked up on the line, fans echoed it online, and it became attached to his legacy in a way results alone hadn't done. Bottas has since leaned into a lighter public image, becoming popular for his personality, candour, and even off-track antics. But in terms of pure racing status, his admission sealed the story. Jaime Alguersuari, Marco's threatening calls. He was once the youngest driver to start a Formula One race, debuting for Toro Rosso at just 19. But his career never grew into the long-term Red Bull success story fans expected. Years later, Alguersuari revealed why, and it came down to words from one man, Helmut Marko. In interviews, Alguersuari described what he called threatening calls from Red Bull's advisor. He claimed Marko would phone him after races, demanding better performances and making it clear his seat was never safe. Those conversations left him drained. Alguersuari admitted he'd lie awake at night, replaying the pressure in his head, and by the time he left F1 in 2011, he said he was mentally exhausted. The bombshell wasn't just about his own career. his comments pulled the curtain back on Red Bull's ruthless driver program. For years, people had suspected it chewed through young talent, but Alguersuari's words confirmed the personal toll. Suddenly, he wasn't remembered for his time in the car. He was remembered for exposing the environment behind it. The fallout made headlines across motorsport media. Fans debated whether Red Bull's success with stars like Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen justified the treatment of those who didn't make the cut. For Alguersuari, the damage was irreversible. He never returned to a Formula One seat, and the words "threatening calls" became part of his story every time his name came up. Jacques Villeneuve, Ferrari fallout. Villeneuve was Formula One royalty in the late 1990s, a world champion with the charisma to match. But by the early 2000s, his career had begun to unravel, and one series of outspoken comments made sure the slide couldn't be stopped. While driving for Bar, and later linked with Ferrari rumours, Villeneuve publicly criticised teams and management decisions in blunt fashion. The most infamous clash came in 2006 when he spoke out against BMW Sauber, questioning the team's direction and making it clear he wasn't happy with how things were run. The team didn't appreciate the remarks. Relations broke down fast, and mid-season, BMW Sauber showed him the door. Villeneuve's exit was announced after the German Grand Prix, officially citing differences of opinion. For a driver who had once beaten Michael Schumacher to a world title, it was a brutal come-down. The narrative stuck. Instead of being remembered for his skill behind the wheel, Villeneuve was tagged as a driver who talked himself out of seats. His reputation as a straight shooter never left, but in the F1 paddock, straight talk often comes at a price. He never raced in Formula One again after 2006. While he remained a media personality and occasional critic of the sport, that final chapter defined his career. Jaime Alguersuari, the critique that stuck. Even years after leaving Formula One, he couldn't escape the shadow of his time at Red Bull. In 2022, over a decade since his last race, he gave interviews that reignited debate around the team's brutal junior program. He explained that the mental strain from Helmut Marko's management style followed him long after he stepped out of the cockpit. He said he still woke up in the night, hearing Marko's voice criticising him, replaying the pressure in his head. It was a striking revelation. For fans who remembered him as the teenager fast-tracked into F1, his words painted a very different picture. Instead of nostalgia for his youth in the sport, the takeaway was trauma, an environment so harsh that it left scars long after his career ended. The reaction across motorsport media was immediate. Headlines picked up his critique, with many calling it confirmation of what other young Red Bull drivers had hinted at for years. The system could produce champions, but it could also crush talent. His comments added to a pattern already seen with drivers like Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, and Alex Albon, whose careers were dented after clashing with Red Bull's expectations. For Alguersuari, those remarks became the lasting note of his career. He moved on to music and other pursuits, but in F1 discussions, his name now circles back to that criticism. One honest reflection became his headline, cementing him as the driver who not only lost his seat young, but also pulled back the curtain on Red Bull's unforgiving approach. And that's it. Now to you, in a sport built on split-second decisions and ruthless pressure, which would you trust more to survive, your driving or your mouth? Comment down below, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.